Okay, so we just figured out in the previous video how we can convert the Japanese GDP in yen into US dollars. That was 531.2 yen times $1 for each 108 yen, left us with, I think we had 4.92 trillion US dollars. So the GDP in Japan, calculated in US dollars, is 4.92 trillion. So just to kind of help us review some of what we're doing, which country has the higher GDP per capita, right? So US has a much higher GDP. We also have more people. So we can take our relative GDPs, divide them by the population sizes, and see what we get. So US GDP per capita is 19.1 trillion. So we have millions, billions, trillions, divided by our population, which was 325.7 million. If I remember, yes, 325.7 million, which gets us to, if we kind of round that, a GDP per capita of about $58,643. So we can do the same for Japan now, since we converted to US dollars. So Japan GDP per capita is, theirs was 4.92 trillion in US dollars. So we have millions, billions, trillions, divided by their population was 126.8, I believe, 126.8 million. 126.8 million. And that works out to be somewhere around 38,000. So 38,801 US dollars. And so making that comparison, I can see that yes, per capita US GDP is higher than per capita GDP in Japan, right? So we've accounted for differences in their prices via the exchange rate, and we accounted for differences in their populations via GDP per capita. So that is all pretty straightforward. If you can do the conversion from yen into US dollars, then you can pretty much handle any question I could potentially throw at you. So one thing that before we go to the next video, this will kind of set up the next video and also help us practice here, is what happens if the exchange rate changes. So you'll notice if you go up and look at the history of the US dollar to Japanese yen exchange rate, there's lots of movements over time. So at any point in time, the exchange rate could change by a pretty significant amount. So in this case, there was a big change in the exchange rate, right? The US dollar appreciated or got more valuable relative to the Japanese yen. So let's see what happens when the exchange rate moves to my GDP in Japan. So now, I think we were 531.2 trillion. And how do I convert that to dollars? Is I take the $1 over the Japanese yen, which is now 216. So what is that in US dollars? 531 is about 2.46 trillion US dollars. So notice that basically cuts GDP in Japan in half, right? So that's like a huge change. And so the point I'm getting at is that the exchange rate depends on a lot of things and can change a lot over time. And so if we really think about it, if this happened overnight, did GDP in Japan really cut by half? And we would say, well, no, right? Their production didn't change at all. It was just the exchange rate calculation that changed. And so, kind of very similar to how we did nominal and real GDP, calculating via the exchange rate means that a country's GDP is going to change as that exchange rate changes. That exchange rate can change for a lot of things that have nothing to do with standards of living or GDP. And so we need some way to get rid of this potential for large variation that has nothing to do with production. And so the way we're going to do that is what we call purchasing power parity, which we will cover in the next video.